I'm working on this project. I mean, I got these books I'm writing, but I think this is a very important project that I'm working on, and I'm going to call this. It's going to be called the Three Pillars of the Faith, and I have this book by F.F. Bruce. I was trying to talk about this the other day, which is F.F. Bruce wrote a book called, it's like Stephen, Peter, James, and John, Studies in Non-Pauline Christianity. And if you get in debates, these people, I mean, it's nonsense. You know, they say, oh, Paul's the real founder of Christianity. You hear that from Jews. You hear that from Muslims. You hear that from, like, atheists. So what do you do about that? And I think one of the ways you approach this is people who had nothing to do with Paul at all. People that Paul says are the pillars of the faith. So I think, I love Paul, but what we need to do is like, okay, I'm going to grant your argument so I can prove you wrong, is what we need to do. All right, let's take Paul out of Christianity. What are we going to have? So these three individuals, Paul calls them the three pillars of the faith. It's Jacob, or James, the brother of Jesus, and it's Cephas, or Cephas actually, Peter, and John. So what's important about these three people? It's like what relationship was there between John, the Gospel of John, his Acts, his Apocalypse? He had nothing to do with Paul, right? It's an independent, non-Pauline branch of Christianity, if that's what you call it. James is the same way, but James is very significant. And this is James of Jerusalem. And when I'm working on this book, I pretty much got the chapter on James done. Most of the chapter on Peter, and a lot on John. What is the significance of James? Well, James is Torah observant, right? That's what he is. He's James the Just, and he's in Jerusalem. Several years ago, they found this ossuary, a bone box, and it's controversial. Now, some people say it's real, some people say it's not. And it had an inscription written on it: James, the son of Joseph, the brother of Jesus. And it's like, if this inscription on this ossuary is authentic, this must have been James the Just, his bone box, statistically. So I don't know. It's like 50% of scholars think it's real, 50% think that, well, the ossuary is real, and James, the son of Joseph, is real. Somebody think that, well, maybe somebody went in there and wrote brother of Jesus. We don't know. They don't know. They haven't been able to decisively to prove that it's a forgery, but scholars have their suspicion. But I think a lot of the controversy is that James is someone that makes the Jews uncomfortable, right? Because they want to draw, what does it mean to be a Jew? To a lot of these Jewish people, it means not believing in Jesus. So here you have this figure, worships in the temple, James the Just, Torah observant, talks about the perfect law of liberty, advocates for Torah observance. So, and he's, not only is he's the brother of Jesus, he's the leader, the real leader of the church. He comes first. Peter defers, it's in the Bible, he defers to James. And there's a lot of evidence that James is the head of the church, above Peter. So there's a lot of concepts I want to look at, like James. What's he about? Well, he's about Torah, for one thing, but he's also about prayer, because the story is his knees were like the knees of a camel. Peter, he's the rock. I think Peter is about proclamation. But the other fact of the matter is he's the apostle to the circumcised, right? It's like the Catholic Church is like, oh, Peter. It's like, well, the biblical Peter is apostle to the Jews. That's not my spin on it. That's what Paul says. Paul says, I'll go to the Gentile. So Peter's ministry had according to the Bible, had a Jewish focus. And I've talked about this. This is the Syriac Pseudo-Clementines. It's a life of Peter written by Ebionite Jewish Christians. And it's interesting. Peter's going on a missionary journey from Caesarea up to Antioch, and he has a series of debates, starting off with Simon the sorcerer. And it's a very interesting book, and it's written by Jewish Christians. It's pretty obviously written by the Ebionite sect. But, here we have these accounts showing Peter also as, Torah observant. Now, the issue with John, like I said, John's like a distinct branch of Christianity. And we have a lot of, first you have what we have in the Bible, right? You have like a mini New Testament in and of itself, right? You got a gospel, you got an epistle, and you got an apocalypse, right? And like I said, there's nothing about Paul or Paul's ideology. Right? It's independent, totally independent of Paul. And I got this New Testament. Hugh Schofield translated it. And later on, apparently he's a Jewish person who came to faith in Messiah. He translated this New Testament. For some reason, he turned away from the faith and wrote the Passover plot. But I kind of like his original New Testament because he reorganized the books. The Bible is inspired, but that doesn't mean the list of the books in the Bible is inspired, right? So he puts Mark first because Mark's the earliest gospel, and then Matthew. Well, I want to say something about Peter here, and something people don't really think about, but I think it's true. The perspective that we have on the life of Jesus is Peter's perspective, largely. And so, well, how would you say that? Well, according to tradition, I got this book. It's Richard Bachman, Jesus and the Eyewitnesses. He's talking about Mark's gospel. And Mark he does take a negative view, seemingly, of the apostle, rebuking their lack of faith and things like that. But still, they're the apostles, regardless. And even Peter's faults are seen here and there. But obviously, the perspective that Papias said that, Mark collected stories he heard from Peter and composed them as gospel. And the other thing, Matthew's gospel, Peter takes a more prominent position than he does in the gospel of Mark. Only in the gospel of Matthew does Peter walk on water. And also, you are the rock, and upon this rock I will build my church. The gates of hell will not prevail against it. How he says that to Peter. That's not in any of the other gospels but Matthew. So why is Matthew so pro-Peter? There's a reason. Can you think what it would be? It's where Matthew originated, in Antioch. Peter was in Antioch. So Matthew goes to Antioch too, I guess, and he writes his gospel there. And since Peter, the chief of the apostles, so they stress he's the founding apostle in a sense. I mean, people were there before Peter, but to have Peter there administering the church from Antioch is a big deal. So that's why he gets a big focus. So, Luke and Acts are meant to be read together. Right? It's Luke part 1, Luke part 2. So we break up the flow by putting John in there. Right? Because it's not meant to be read that way. So this is the way Hugh Schofield did. I think it's brilliant. And then he has the epistles of Paul, which, naturally follow, and it does follow Acts, and then the other epistles. And then he puts the Johannine corpus, the gospel, all together in a unit. Just like Luke, Acts, that's the way it's meant to be read. All the books by John should be put together in a unit like that. I think so. If it's like, I'm looking at this, it's like, well, that makes a lot of sense. And then putting the epistles in chronological order instead of haphazardly, or I think Rome's the capital. And then Corinth, why is Corinth next? Corinth is a big city too. Probably because it's longer. Probably because he's divided it 1st and 2nd Corinthians because it's long. And then we have the other congregations. So this is how and why John's important. But the community founded by John, I think this is very significant, is they observed the Passover. And they're attacked for it. It's like, oh, are you observing the Passover? And they say John and Philip, because Philip evangelized that. This is how we were instructed by the apostles to celebrate the resurrection of Yeshua, of Jesus, in conjunction with the Passover. This is apostolic tradition. they went back and forth. At first, the Pope would say, "No, we're going to celebrate it on a Sunday, always on a Sunday," and then eventually, they'd have to. The Pope could not. I mean, it's like the apostles told you to do it. You got to do what the apostles say, right? But at the Council of Nicaea, they finally no more. They call these people the Quatrodecimans. But the thing is, there's like a body of extra biblical literature I think is very important that is written by the Johannine community. What do we have? You have which is very important, the Odes of Solomon, the fragments of Papias. You have the Epistola Apostolorum. And this is kind of funny. In the Bible, whenever the apostles are listed, Peter comes first in the Bible. But in some of their literature, they put John first. It's like, what's the logic for putting John first? Well, a community founded by John, that's their apostle, so they're going to list him first for one thing. But the other reason is like, well, he's the beloved apostle, right? He's the one that Peter had to go through Jesus through John, Is Peter the beloved? Is Peter ever described as the apostle, the disciple that Jesus loved? So it's like, oh, he's the to this community. He lived the longest too, and there's some disputes about there might have been more than one John. There could have been John the Evangelist and John the Elder, John the Priest. John was a priest, though. There's indications in the Bible, and there's also tradition. There's traditions that says he had the plates, the gold plate. Did that mean he had the breastplate? Or they think it refers to the holy to the Lord thing that the high priest wore in his turban. But that's an ancient tradition. But it says that that John brought Peter into the courtyard because he was known unto the high priest. He's known to the high priest. That's why people think that John the fisherman was different from John the evangelist, because how could a fisherman be known to the high priest? But it's like it doesn't necessarily rule it out, because like, I don't know, look at Rabbi Shammai. Well, he's a carpenter. He's a founder of a school of rabbinic thought, but he's just a carpenter. Jesus is just a carpenter. I was reading this book. It's called Apostle, and he was saying that to be able to fish in the Sea of Galilee is not really all that big. I've been there. It's about 9 miles, 10 miles so wide and 20 miles long. So it's a large lake in one sense, but it's not all that big in another. And they're saying that Herod, this would be Herod Antipas, right? It's like you had to buy a license to be allowed to fish, and they didn't come cheap. And then notice that Zebedee had hired hands, so he wasn't just a subsistence fisherman. And Paul was people had their trades, so he could have been a well-to-do fisherman. I don't know. The thing is, it's like there are compelling reasons to believe there could have been more than one John, but traditionally there is one. So when I write this chapter, it's like, looks like there's one John, but there's strong arguments that there. But I think you could explain that, just because Levites. Well, look at Zacchaeus. There were more priests than there were opportunities to minister in the temple. So I've read this verse, like that could have been. You have to come up on the course, right? And you have to be selected. So that for a lot of priests or Levites, that could have been a once in a lifetime opportunity that you get to go and officiate in the temple. Of course, you had temple guards and things like that, but that's probably true. So yeah, sometimes people that doesn't necessarily mean to preclude him, but I don't know. I think the argument that there's a John the priest and John the fisherman is John they try to differentiate. You have to put the idea out there because it's compelling, but I'm not convinced. Right? It's like it's compelling, but not totally convincing. Because I don't understand why, if there are other Johns. Well, Eusebius tries it. The reason why Eusebius tries to say there's more Johns, he has an ulterior motive, right? He didn't like the book of Revelation, right? Because he doesn't believe in it. He's one of these preterists, amillennialists. So you got to give Eusebius his due. He's preserved a lot of information. If it wasn't for Eusebius' church history, a lot of things would be lost. So it's a very important work. But he's wrong. He didn't want the book of Revelation in the Bible. So he's like, oh, this wasn't written by John the Apostle wrote the Gospel in 1st and 2nd, 3rd John, but not the book of Revelation. That's written by somebody else called John. But that was his ulterior motive. He wasn't just going by where the evidence. He's trying to discredit the Gospel. That's right. He believes in the Gospel. He's trying to discredit the book of Revelation. So, like I mentioned, you have the Odes of Solomon. And this is very interesting. So it's an early Jewish Christian hymn book written around 70 AD in Aramaic that the person who composed it, they believe, was a member of the Qumran community. And look at the because he uses a lot of phrases and concepts that are found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And then people look at what he wrote, and it's like one of the things about the odes of Solomon that kind of strikes me, and it's got it sounds like it's feminine in a way. I don't know how to explain it. Yeah, I guess men could be romantic, but there's just a lot of it's a beautiful hymn book. It's the earliest hymn book we have. But scholars looking at it say, hey, look, this person, whoever wrote this, assumed to be a man, even though there's this feminist. Maybe he was married and his wife is contributing to the, because it's like men don't usually. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just noticeable to me, I guess. But he has he alludes to and references concepts that the Qumran community used. So scholars looking at the text, it's like, what do you know about this guy? It says that some people think he knew John the Baptist or saw him at least once. Maybe he was just a kid. He's a part of the Qumran community. And then he met the community of John. He probably met the Apostle John and joined their community. And I guess he's converted, and he writes this hymn book. And the reason why I think it's late 1st century is around 74 AD. And he could have been 60 in his 60s if he saw John the Apostle. He would have saw him when he was. I guess he could have been 74. Like lived to be 80. Who knows? That's entirely possible. But it seems to be alluding to the destruction of the Jewish temple in Egypt at Leontopolis. And it's like, okay, why would you write about it's so obscure, you know what I mean? Why would you write about something like 20, 30 years later about, who knows about the destruction of the temple in Leontopolis? If it just happened, it could be referred to. Why would you refer to something that, later? It doesn't. So, I looked at it, so that does seem to be referring to the destruction of the Jewish temple in Leontopolis. So, I think it's 1st century. And it's like, the other thing is like, the Qumran community, they locked up those caves in 70 AD. How could this be from 100 or later? The community's dead, right? It makes more sense for it to be 1st century, that this person is a member of the community and he, met John, wrote hymns for the early church. That's just the most. So anyway, this is Johannine literature. And you got the Epistola Apostolorum. And you got the Peripascha. This is very interesting. It's like a Passover Haggadah, a Messianic Passover Haggadah, written around the year 160 by this community. It's kind of a mixed bag. So the author is Jewish, Melito of Sardis, but he's like, it sounds. You have to look at the context of when it was written. Well, he's Jewish for one thing, right? He's a Jewish Christian, and he's like speaking very harshly against fellow Jews for not believing the Messiah, for crucifying the Son of God, things like that. So, but the other thing, I mentioned this before, at that time, when this was written, Christianity is not the official religion of the Roman Empire, so you had these two Jewish sects that are, struggling with each other, really. And the Jews who rejected Jesus, they would speak harshly against, they blasphemed Jesus. So maybe they're, it's just, the thing is, it's a Messianic Jewish Christian Haggadah from the 1st century. A lot of it's beautiful and powerful, but it does have, people look at, it's anti-Semitic. Not really, but it's, I don't know, I find those parts harsh too. But, it's amazing something like that survived, right? And the other thing about this man wrote this book called The Lamb's High Feast, and we don't think about this too much because it's hard for us to conceive of how life was lived, 2,000 years ago. Jewish people at the time of Jesus, you didn't go to your Randalls or Kroger's and pick up a Passover Haggadah. They didn't have printing. That would be expensive to, So they didn't use Haggadahs back then. A lot of people, probably 60% of people couldn't read or write anyway back then. You probably had 20-30% literacy among the Jews. It's just, they didn't have mandatory public education, it's hard for us to conceive of. It's a different world. Even, probably Jews were more literate than other people in society back then, but they still had a high, compared to us, they didn't have 90% literacy rate. At best, it's 50-50, and it probably wasn't even that high. So what I'm saying is, like, Passover traditions are like Christmas. We don't have a Christmas Haggadah. People just do Christmas. There's certain things everybody does, but there's not like here's how to do the Christmas book. It's like, did you hang the stockings? Here's the blessing over the stockings or the tree. It's not. So it's the same way. They had Passover traditions that were later written down, but it was oral and it wasn't clearly defined, right? So anyway, what this author is saying is, I'll give you an example. There's the Afikoman, right? You got the 3 pieces of bread. You take the middle bread out, and then you break it, and you hide it. You wrap it up and hide it, and at the end of it seems like a symbol of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, and the bread of life he's taken, broke it. It looks messianic, and it could well be, because what this author is saying. I wish I had this. I have it around here somewhere. It's, he has this. He's discussing it. I like to get his book, The Lamb's High Feast, but he's saying that this was Passover traditions by the Ebionites, by the Quattrodeciman, and what he's saying, the Passover Haggadah and this Seder Haggadah of Melito Sardis had the same origins, right? This is when the Haggadah was developing, and part of the development was how believing Jews and Christians who still celebrated Passover. So there might have been a crossover, cross-fertilization or pollinization. And the 160, it's like, well, I wonder when the first Haggadah appeared. So Jews become, a minority in Europe, and they become more, you probably did have high rates later on, high rates of literacy among the Jewish community. And then the rabbinic tradition asserts itself, and the Passover, but the Passover Seder has its origins actually. To see what is going on, the Melito Sardis' Peri-Pascha gives us a snapshot of that period when what would become the Haggadah and Seder was developing. So I think these things are very, very important. And like I said, there's core concepts. Prayer would be, and Torah observances is James. Peter's about proclamation. He's a fisherman. He's an evangelist. John's about prophecy. They have their traits too. Like the apostle of love. Like I said, this is obedience. I kind of look at Peter as like perseverance, because he keeps on screwing up, falling down, and getting back up. Right? You can't count this guy out. Comes up, takes a hit. It's his own fault. But he doesn't give up and ends up, dying as a martyr. And I think the evidence, we have this material like I said, the Pseudo-Clementine literature, but I think Peter, he was crucified in Rome. I think the evidence goes that way. Probably crucified upside down, but maybe not. I don't think they saw crucifixion. I don't think such a thing would occur to them. It's possible, but we kind of venerate the cross now. They didn't venerate the cross back then. The cross did not become. I don't have a problem with the cross, but it did not become a symbol of Christianity until they stopped crucifying people. Then it came to be identified as because Jesus died on the cross. It became uniquely identified with Yeshua, but not before. Well, they used other symbols, mostly the Kairos symbol. That's the R, Christos, Cairo. That was a big symbol. But once Constantine stops crucifixion, so you probably see people crucified at least every couple of weeks, if not more often than that. It's hard to think of. Oh, I don't want to be crucified the way my Lord was. Well, it's like you've seen hundreds of people crucified throughout your life, I don't know if you think of it that way. But this story was written in the mid, when this 150 or so. That's when they started writing these to 200 to 220, 150 to 225. It's hard to say exactly when books like. But the Gospel of John, Peter says, well, what about this one? We're talking about the beloved disciple. And Yeshua says, don't worry about him. You need to follow me. The day is going to come, Peter, when they're going to take you and lead you to a place you don't want to go. And they're going to stretch you out there. That's crucifixion. It leads you to a place. So, I don't know. Some of these other apostles are crucified. They say, oh, he's crucified. That's ridiculous. I might grant that Peter was crucified upside down, but the other apostles, it's like, no way, it's absurd. If there's a tradition of this apostle being crucified, I have no reason not to believe it, but I don't believe they're all crucified upside down. It's just they didn't look at crucifixion that way. I don't think it occurred to them. You didn't want to be crucified upside down, right side up, sideways, or anyway. And I don't think he had a lot of choice in the matter. Josephus mentions they have these mass crucifixions. Sometimes it would, they're sadistic and they crucify people in odd positions. So it's possible. It's possible, but I think you should say that Peter was definitely crucified in Rome. Might have been crucified upside down. That's the tradition. So when I'm putting this book together, I did this in my Abdius of Babylon book. The first thing I want to talk about is, what are the apostles about? They're about the proclamation of the good news. That's what they're for. That's the whole concept of being an apostle. So this is very interesting. It's called a testimonia. I want to start with that. And this is probably the original. I was trying to talk about the Sabbath, but we had a good discussion. There's nothing wrong with that. So I was reading. I think I read Widow Schofield's books a long time ago. Maybe his New Testament, but he's talking about a testimony. What's a testimony? And I forget the name of the scholars. I wrote it down. I haven't memorized his name yet. Ellen Rendell Harris, something like that. I should have it memorized. But he came up with this theory. I think it looks like it's true to me that probably the first Christian book ever written was like a crypt notes or cheat sheets of messianic prophecies just lined out. So I did it. This isn't a scholarly attempt, but what I did is I went through the Gospels, and just the Gospels. And every time the Gospel says this happened in fulfillment of this prophecy, I put it in there. And I think if you look at, there's telltale signs that they had this document, because Mark says, the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. As is written in the prophets, I'll send my messenger before you, the voice of one crying out in the wilderness, prepare you the way of the Lord. One is, it says, as Isaiah the prophet said. Isaiah said the second verse, not the first verse. That's like Malachi. So he's probably just looking at the list and didn't, when he's putting it together, he's probably looking at the testimonia. So I think this, then the real clincher to me is they found a testimonia in the Dead Sea Scrolls. They did, so a Bible scholar looking at the gospel said, you know what, it looks like they had a document that they're referencing, a testimonia, collection of Old Testament prophecies. So then they find one in the Dead Sea Scroll communities. 2 or 3 of the prophecies they listed are prophecies we would say about Jesus, but then it seems to be their concept of Messiah, which is not the same as ours. So I want to start with the proclamation of the gospel. And in the end, or I'm going to close in just a minute, make a couple of comments here. I don't know, I might talk about the fourth pillar. Of course, this is non-Pauline Christianity, but I think I'd have to mention this, and this would be the Thomas Christians. So they had a whole, even today, the Christians and the Assyrian Christians, they're Thomas Christians. because a lot of this literature, like the Gospel of Thomas, the Acts of Thomas, was produced in around Edessa, and then you have Thaddeus is associated with Thomas, and Thaddeus, in the accounts, Thaddeus is sent by Thomas to preach to the Assyrian people, and you got St. Thomas in India, and the veneration of Thomas. I mean, it's special to the people in India that one of the 12 apostles, that the famous doubting Thomas, came to India. It's a big deal for him. They have all these sites he went to. And you see indications. I think that the reason why some of these apostles like Thomas are mentioned in the Gospel of John is because they were active and they were known to that community. He's just not mentioning them just because, like, he mentions Jude, he mentions Thomas, Peter and Andrew, probably because I think Papias mentions the same names. These are probably, and we do have apocryphal Gospels about that verify this. The last chapter I want to look at is like, let's think about Greco-Roman. That's a Roman Christendom. I don't know what I'm going to call this. Versus, I don't know, the Semitic, I don't know, we'll call it Way of the Nazarene. I think that, I don't know, the Greco-Roman expression of Christianity has not necessarily been a bad thing. I think overall it's been positive. Our universities, which are corrupted now, medicine, everything came from Western Christianity. So there's problems with it, but it also has its virtues. And sometimes people will leave behind your Greco-Roman way of thinking, and what exactly is the Greco-Roman way of thinking, and why is it wrong? You got to define these terms. Maybe it is wrong, But what is Semitic Christianity too? I mean, yes, we have it. We have It's kind of interesting. Some of the material we have, some of it's written in Aramaic. We don't have that much in Hebrew. I mean, preserved by Christians. But some of it's by Jews, but it's written in Greek. Like the Septuagint. Philo of Alexandria, very important, influential thinker. Probably had an impact on, from Alexandria. Might have had an impact on Apollos. He could be evoking and referencing to some of his ideas. And whoever wrote the Epistle of Hebrews is coming from that school of thought. So, I don't know, it's just a topic to be explored. I have to think through it and explain. But we should be trying to get back to the way it was in the first century. Right? I think it's a noble endeavor to get back to pure, authentic first century Christianity. So I should have this. I just feel like the Lord's moving me to do this. I think it's important. And it's interesting. It's kind of interesting. The three pillars of the faith, they all have a Jewish focus in a sense, right? They just do. And this is what Paul says. And it's Paul should have been more differential and respectful the way he writes about these things. And if you read through it, he moderates his position in the book of Romans. So sometimes he's pretty harsh against. I guess they're being harsh against him too. But you gotta look at their position. So you're called by Jesus Christ, right? Jesus of Nazareth, Yeshua. He chooses you, calls you to be an apostle, and 3 years, or however long it was. Some people argue it's just 1 year, maybe it was, but it seems to indicate it's 3 years of the Gospel of John. So 3 years, or however long, they go through all of his trials and tribulations. They see him crucified. The risen Yeshua appears to them, and then Paul comes up and it's like, I'm an apostle too. Okay, really? How do you say that? Well, I had a vision. Jesus appeared to me. It's like, what? Well, Jesus didn't appear to us and talk to us about you. It's like, Johnny come lately. Who do you think you are? You're going to tell us how to do things? Or were you there? I didn't see you at the upper room or the Garden of Gethsemane. He was sweating. We were there, and you're coming around telling us how to do things. But then, as I note in my book, and the way James is portrayed in the book of Acts, he's conciliatory and trying to come up with Instead of taking the same extreme position, let's come to the middle one. So he's not some kind of, yeah. Some people wonder, did James receive Paul's offering? I'm going to talk about that in this. Yeah, I saw this, somebody wrote this, what is it, a polite bribe. That's what he's trying to say, that Paul's trying to bribe James into accepting his mission with money. And there's this argument that James refused, because that would validate Paul's mission. But I don't know. Let's just trust the Bible. So here's what could have happened. I think there's a lot of tension in Israel. And I said, we'll take the offering, but we want you to do a goodwill act, an act of goodwill to reconcile things. Just go to the temple, participate in these rituals. They're probably going to receive the offering after Paul came in. You did the rituals and reconciliation thing, but they didn't have that chance. I don't know. I think that money was dedicated to the Lord. They probably. I was thinking about it. They probably laundered it. You know what I'm saying? In a way, it's like, Paul's not going to come give us this offering now, because the climate there. Sure they're concerned about it. There's nothing James could have done about it once he's, what was he going to pray for him? He could maybe send But what happened to the money? They probably, one of Paul's friends probably gave it to one of the Jewish Christians to give it to James, right? I doubt they ran off or absconded with the money. They probably kind of, is that really laundering it? It's like, so Paul didn't have this big ritual over it. That's probably what he wanted to do. Here's the offering, James, and I think Paul wanted to do that too, also to submit to, because he talks about that in Romans. I'm going to Jerusalem. He's afraid of it. He says, I pray that, I'll be accepted by them. So I think we should just, instead of doubting the inspired record, Luke does not say if he received the offering or not, but I think, maybe I'm wrong. We don't know. I'm just conjecturing, but I think that's the most plausible thing, right? So, yeah, it's going to be, I'm trying to keep the book short, but this is what it's going to be.